Welcome to the InnerVerse. It's an illusion.
Welcome to the one within all to another episode of InnerVerse. I'm your host, Chance, fresh off a great Thanksgiving holiday. And I hope you listeners out there can say the same. And you're enjoying the shift into Sagittarian season. This moment in time is primed and perfect for a deep dive I've been patiently waiting to take into one of the most enigmatic figures in religio-stellar myth, the serpent-bearing savior in the stars known as Ophiuchus. Perhaps it's past due that we peruse the catalog of symbolism laid up in this liminal individual because, interestingly enough, InnerVerse itself was born under this most auspicious asterism way back in 2015. I was a different guy back then, and the podcast journey itself is where I found my fascination with the cosmodrama of the constellations. But what I did know was that for me, starting this podcast was a crucial component on my course to self-realization, and I hoped to bring a lot of other people along with me. In hindsight, it's rather remarkable to realize that perhaps beyond any other legendary Logos archetype, Ophiuchus' part in the grand pattern is as the portal to the recovery of our higher selves, the shower or the shower of the way to establish consciousness in the gap between stimulus and response, and thus find true freedom, unfettered from the conditioning of trauma. And of course, what's so striking about this serpentine singularity of salvation is that in many ways, in most episodes, this theme is what InnerVerse is all about. So joining us for this Ophiolatrous explication is returning guest David Warner Mathisen, author of at least 8 excellent books on astrotheology and the ancient worldwide system of star myth allegory. In my study on the subject, I've yet to find work as comprehensive and laser-focused as David's, and I recommend you search for his previous InnerVerse episodes if you want more. In his newest book, Myth and Trauma, Higher Self, Ancient Wisdom, and Their Enemies, I'm pretty sure that's the newest book, David dedicates a whole chapter to Ophiuchus where he lays out all the confirmations you'll need to see just how important this constellation is as a representative in the sky for a huge array of characters, such as, but not limited to, Buddha, Jesus, Krishna, Solomon, Moses, Athena, Odysseus, and even occasionally Loki. Mathisen is the master of star myth, and if you check out his website linked in the show notes, you can pick up a book and benefit from his many long labors of love on the subject. But that is not all, folks. To the InnerVerse faithful, he needs no introduction. This time around, we're also joined by Mario Garza of Symbolic Studies, one of the most well-rounded mythologists and authentically curious investigators of the technology of sacred symbols. I've been wanting to put these two guys in a room together for a long time, and finally the stars have aligned. So now that we're all good and fired up, let's open door number 13 and see what mind prizes await us as we begin our Ophiuchian explorations with David Warner Mathisen and Mario Garza. Welcome to InnerVerse, dudes, and thanks for coming on.
Wow, thanks. Great introduction. Great to meet you, Mario. Great to be back, Chance.
Likewise. Yeah, that was a great intro, man. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. I really want to recapture that moment from before we hit record where What's the meme about you, David?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's Ophiuchus, but it's Ophiuchus. In other words, Ophiuchus is so central that people kind of get tired of me pointing out, well, this is Ophiuchus, because in this ancient system that you alluded to in that tremendous run-up, Ophiuchus is this pivotal figure, this doorway figure, liminal figure, great word, liminal, which means what? Everybody out there in grammar land, the threshold of a door. So a liminal space is like the threshold space or the in-between interstitial space. These are like words that university professors like to spout off. But Ophiuchus is this pivotal, central, but hidden, mysterious, unseen, and in many ways forgotten or left out or suppressed or buried figure that is the key to everything in many ways.
Very interesting. Yeah. Would you say he's a mercurial figure?
Ooh, so that is a really excellent question, which is my way of saying I'm stalling for time, thinking I don't know. No. So I've actually written a book on the Greek myths a long time ago, 2016, called Star Myths of the World, Volume 2, Greek Mythology, where I argue that Mercury is more likely Aquarius. That said, Aquarius and Ophiuchus have some interesting similarities to where Ophiucan figures and Aquarian figures will sometimes overlap. You mentioned Jesus. I was going to save Jesus for a later chance, but Jesus is definitely an Ophiuchus figure. I can show that. I'll show a little bit on some slides. But Jesus says, when you see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the heavens, he'll separate the sheep from the goats, which Aquarius does. So Aquarius is the sign. There's only one sign that's really a single male human individual. That would be Aquarius, unless you count Ophiuchus, which Jesus is definitely Ophiuchus. But Jesus is also Aquarius, the sign of the Son of Man, who separates the sheep. Obviously, Aries is on one side of Aquarius, and Capricorn, the goat, is on the other side. So in some ways, when Jesus turns water into wine, he's probably Aquarius, pouring out some water that turns into wine. And also the coin in the mouth of the fish story, when he says to Peter, hey, go catch a fish and pull a coin out. There's a fish right underneath Aquarius called this southern fish, Piscis astrinus, with fomalhaut, the important star fomalhaut. I've seen on your Instagram, Mario, how you talk about the royal stars and fomalhaut, which in Arabic means mouth of the fish. That's this really bright star right at the mouth of the southern fish, right below Aquarius, which Peter's actually Aquarius as well. I talk about that too. So this is all me coming around to your question. I can see some evidence that Mercury in this running pose, and Aquarius has this running pose in the constellations, if you outline Aquarius the way H.A. Ray does, is an Aquarian. There's an Aquarian connection to Hermes or Mercury, but also I would also agree with you that there are some Ophiuchus connections. So you asked the question, I'll throw it back to you. Like, where are you going, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, sure. So my angle with Ophiuchus, I haven't done as deep of a dive as yourself on Ophiuchus, but the material that I've read over the years, this idea of Ophiuchus being a central sign, there's even some zodiac wheels where, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while, but they will put Ophiuchus literally in the center of a wheel. It's a modern wheel. It's not an ancient wheel or anything like that, but this is alluding to this central, location. And what I've read over the years was that Ophiuchus essentially is kind of alluding to an older sort of location in the sky, or it's alluding to an older sort of deity, if you will. And when I think of the hub of a wheel, I think of the axle of a wheel, and I think of the northern sky. And Ophiuchus is further north, if I'm not mistaken, right? On the ecliptic there. And so all of the things that I've come across over the last couple of years, and some of the material that I'm going to reference tonight, I wish I could relocate some of these entries, but it said something along the lines of Ophiuchus kind of being a bend in a river, if you will, kind of pointing you in another direction. And it's a more northern sort of direction. And kind of like yourself, I have a thing where I really like to decode and unpack the northern sky, the circumpolar constellations, Ursa Major, Minor. And so I think a lot of the symbolism that I've decoded with the northern sky, I almost feel like Ophiuchus is kind of nudging you in that direction to kind of acknowledge what's happening up there. And what it's saying to me, with it being the 13th sign, if that's the case, right? And I'm open to all of it, by the way, but it's breaking you out of this solar paradigm, right? The 12 being more so a solar number, the 12 disciples, but Christ being the 13th. And so the 13th kind of being a completion of this 12, the 13th card being death. And the hanged man too, there's a lot of symbolism with the 12th card of the major arcana that links it to solar symbolism. So it's kind of a tradition in older decks with the hanged man card that there's actually 12 branches coming off of the two posts that the hangman hangs from. But there's a 13th branch up top. And what I've read is that symbolically, the solar tree has 12 branches, right? Which makes a lot of sense. So this 13 kind of breaking you out of the sort of paradigm or matrix of the 12 sign system into this other thing. And what I tend to see is that it seems like, as ancient as these constellations are, they're kind of a newer sort of god, if you will. But in the northern sky, seems like these are more ancient gods. These are more ancient constellations, kind of hearkening back to more of a stellar tradition, or what I refer to as like a polar tradition or northern tradition. And so I see Ophiuchus also, people saying that Ophiuchus is ruled by Mercury. If it's the 13th sign, I don't know if you agree with that or how, much of a consensus that is. But I thought that was very, very intriguing, because I always think of Mercury and the caduceus. And I know Ophiuchus relates to Asclepius, right? And so the staff symbolism in general, with the serpent wrapped around it, I see a lot of northern sort of stuff going on there. So that's just kind of like a little brief overview of how I tend to see things.
Yeah, thanks for laying that out. So you said a lot of really intriguing stuff there. Let's maybe start at the last thing that's freshest in my mind about the staff. So Ophiuchus figures, and we'll see it, I'm going to show, very frequently in myth have a staff or a rod. So if you think of Moses, his staff turns into what when he throws it on the ground as one of his proofs? A serpent. Moses is for sure an Ophiuchus figure. I didn't actually put that in the slide lineup for today, but we could talk about it if you want to. But staffs and also spears, which if you think of in the sky, there's just stars. So we're drawing the lines using our imagination. But Ophiuchus suggests either one spear or sometimes even two spears. For instance, in the Iliad, Hector, who's the strongest fighter on the side of the Trojans, he's kind of Achilles versus Hector is the real duo. The two strongest is Achilles versus Hector, and Hector is associated with Ophiuchus for sure. He has two spears. There's specific passages in book 5 of the Iliad where he has two spears, and one of the spears has a hoop on the top of it, which is very well. I don't want to go too far without bringing up the stars of Ophiuchus, so that people who maybe haven't dived into all this symbology as much as you and I and Chance have can envision Ophiuchus. I'll pull it up in just a sec. But so spears, staffs, but as you said, a spear or a staff that turns into a snake or has a snake running up it. Asclepius for sure is Ophiuchus. Asclepius is this Greek ancient god of medicine who was so successful at healing that eventually Zeus said, he's healing all the nobody's dying. This is going to get out of control. I have to destroy Asclepius with a thunderbolt. And that's interesting because of what I'll show you in just a second. But he has the kind of original staff with a serpent going up. But in his other hand, he carries these little honeyed cakes, little small round cakes, which I believe has to do with the other side of Ophiuchus, the serpent's head side of Ophiuchus. We'll pull it up in a sec. But there's in India little cakes that Ganesh, the elephant-headed god, has little cakes, and Ganesh is associated with Ophiuchus. So
maybe the manna from heaven in the Moses story could be that.
Absolutely. Moses and the crossing of the Red Sea. So the other thing, Chance, in your beautiful intro, you made a not so Freudian slip where you said the shower of the myths, Ophiuchus, but also the shower. There is a shower right next to Ophiuchus. It's called the Milky Way. Like when Zeus comes down as a shower to the mother of Perseus, Danae, who's been imprisoned in a box under the earth by Zeus, and by her father. Zeus is like, well, that can't stop me. He descends in the form of actually a shower of gold. But I mentioned that just because Chance, or Mario, you're talking about going up to the northern. I think it's important to point out that around the world, the myths are based on this same system, including in the Maya, and I'll show you some South American imagery, and including in Australia. I've found evidence in some of the Australian sacred stories of the indigenous Australian Aboriginal cultures where their myths are used. There's one where there's a fisherman pursuing a spear, trying to spear a fish whose eye is shining up from the deep, just like we were talking about Aquarius, and Piscis astrinus is the name of the southern fish in Latin. But so what I'm saying is this is around the world, in cultures around the world, even in the southern hemisphere. But the Milky Way, which intersects the zodiac, seems to form another path, and going along the Milky Way towards Perseus seems to have been a symbol of ascension, of getting in touch and connecting with the spiritual realm. So I'll just finish off now this kind of little riff off of what you said, because all those, so many things that you said we could unpack for the whole hour, but this idea of arrangement with a hub in the center. Ophiuchus is like the pivot that connects the zodiac to the spiritual realm. And it doesn't necessarily have to be northern, but it is north of the Milky Way. We'll see, or of the zodiac. We'll see it in a second. But there's arrangements around the world of this hub. Scott Onstott, have either of you guys heard of Scott Onstott? He made a brilliant video called Secrets in Plain Sight, and has done a lot of other esoteric work. Chance, you were nodding your head. He alerted me to a book, or put me onto a book a couple of years ago called 12 Tribe Nations by John Michel. John Michel famously wrote View Over Atlantis and New View Over Atlantis in the 60s about ley lines, and kind of got the ley line movement rejuvenated in the 60s. It had actually started much earlier in the 20s, people discovering ley lines in England. Of course, they're much more ancient than that. They're called dragon lines in China, and they're very ancient knowledge. But John Michel later wrote a book called 12 Tribe Nations, where he shows an arrangement in nations around the world of 12 around a 13th. For instance, in the Bible, the 12 houses or 12 children of Israel they're arranged north, south, east, and west, but there's a 13th in the center, and that's where the connection with the divine is. That's where the priests are. And that's not just a pattern in the Bible. He finds it in Madagascar. He finds it in Iceland. He finds it in Ireland. He finds it in Wales. He finds it in the Inca. And it's an arrangement of 12 with a 13th in the center that is connected to the divine. And so Ophiuchus, I didn't know about that book until Scott Onstott turned me onto it. But this goes along with what I found in the myths of the world, where Ophiuchus is the hidden or suppressed connection to the divine that we all actually have access to, but we forget. And that's why it's kind of excluded. And that's what I think is going on with the suppression of Ophiuchus. And so it, I think, ties in with all the things that you're saying, Mario, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. I see a lot of sacred center symbolism with Ophiuchus, and you're absolutely right. When you look at any star as an example, if it's a 5-pointed star, there's that 6th point in the middle. If it's a 7-pointed star, there's that 8th point in the middle. And as you just mentioned, with the 12, there's that 13th point in the middle. That's the point of ascension. So that would be like the hub of a wheel or like an axle, right? And with Ophiuchus, actually, it's interesting that you brought up John Michel, because one of my favorite books of his is called At the Center of the World, and it's exploring polar and northern symbolism with a lot of European tribes and how they had a central sort of location for their village, for their people. And oftentimes it was indicated with a tree or a mound or a standing stone or something along these lines. And he was saying that a lot of these people, what they were trying to do is emulate the sky, the heavens, in particular the northern sky. So my understanding is this was pre-zodiac, or at least perhaps solar worship, and so they looked in the heavens and they saw that all of the stars were revolving around one central star, the pole star. And there's a debate to be had, in my opinion, whether or not the pole star shifts. I'm meeting more and more people who think that the pole star maybe has always been stationary, which I think is kind of intriguing, but that they had this sort of concentric ringed sort of idea where they kind of they formulated their civilization or their culture in kind of a ringland sort of way, and that there was a sacred center right there in the middle. And I see Ophiuchus kind of alluding to the center in a number of ways. I think the galaxy thing is fascinating, the Milky Way galaxy, where it's located, right? The center of the galaxy. And also it's right next to a centaur. I see a lot of center symbolism with the centaur, right? And it's just right there. And there's a relationship there, right? Obviously. So I can kind of see the symbolic center symbolism coming about, being expressed from Ophiuchus in a few different ways, but I'm on board with a lot of things you're saying here. This is a super fascinating sign. I don't think I've ever talked publicly about Ophiuchus. So this is my first time getting into it.
I
want to add, so my perspective on the things you guys are laying out that might help sort of bring it all together is I look at the entire sky as the psyche of the divine, or God's consciousness made visible, or the collective consciousness made visible. The all, in a sense. So when we ask the question, is Ophiuchus a mercurial figure, or is he Mercury? Or as you show in your books, David, how maybe sometimes a particular figure is, like Loki, for example, is Sagittarius. Maybe another time he actually does show up as Ophiuchus, and maybe another time he's Boötes. The way I comprehend that is whatever the protagonist of a particular myth is, he's like the point of consciousness of the collective, what it is currently in our attention. And then all the other characters and the backdrop and symbolism and the locations he travels through are all these other archetypal aspects of that are unconscious until he comes into awareness of them. And so when we look at all of the tableau of and cast of characters that are in the constellations, I think each of them represents a fragment of the psyche of the pleroma. And that's why one character, one protagonist can sometimes embody one thing and sometimes another. It's been said that the ecliptic, each of the zodiac signs are a role that the sun plays on its journey, and it's like an actor that changes characters in different scenes. And I like to think of it that way. And then when we consider Ophiuchus as this point where the horizontal band of the ecliptic and that endless circle that the sun travels in is now intersecting, and nearly 90-degree perpendicular with the Milky Way, which seems to be not just a way but a way as in like one that you traveling north. The riddle is to find the middle, that point where Now there's stillness. Everything revolves around the throne, which is an anagram for north, the pole star. The Ophiuchus sits right at the point of that intersection and is like the doorway, or Jesus says, I am the door. Jesus says, I am the way, showing you the way to get out of the cycle of what you might consider conditioning or a program in a sense. Because what is the ecliptic? What is the zodiac? It shows you what your traits and tendencies are based on when you were born, where you were born, and how that affected you. And in a way, that's actually very similar to trauma. I'm not saying that your zodiac chart and your sign and all that is something that, you should feel traumatized by, but it operates in a way very similar to trauma. It's a type of conditioning that unless you bring your free will to bear on your actions and get into that gap, that liminal space between stimulus and response, and then make a choice rather than react, then even your zodiac sign and all the ways that your chart operates are like a type of almost like mind control or conditioning. And so the sun is in this endless loop, repeating this same cycle, going through the ecliptic forever and ever. And that's the earthly realm. That's the mortal realm. And what I think is being shown by Ophiuchus is this way to look up, to elevate yourself, get above that circle, that cycle, so that instead of being caught in it, you're now above it and you're in the stillness, the north, the center point, looking down, and thus able to decide, where do I want to be on this wheel right now, instead of caught in the progress and the endless loop, the time loop. That's my best understanding of it. A lot of that understanding was highly aided by the really good chapter on Ophiuchus in Myth and Trauma, David's book.
Yeah, well, thanks for that little book rec, and I'm really glad that you found value in their chance. And what I was going to say is, what you're saying is fascinating, because I have published one book just since then, but it's fresh off the presses, so you might not know about it, called Invoking the Ancient Gods in You, which just came out and goes further down that line that I was going in Myth and Trauma, but talks about how, as you said, Chance, the zodiac is all our different ingredients, and different recipes call for more, paprika than others. And some people have more cumin, and some people have more, salt or pepper or whatever. We have every one of us has a different mix of ingredients, and they all have something beneficial to give us. And those are all, like you said, in the pleroma, but also pleroma out there in the visible / invisible universe, but also in here. So all those characters in the myths are different parts of who we are. And some of us have more of this part than that part. Some of us have more Loki than others. Some of us may have more Aries than others, or some of us may have more Venus than others, or Aphrodite, or, different mixes. But we all have access to this hidden self, suppressed self, that is the connection with the divine, that actually is where we get inspiration that can't be explained. And since writing Myth and Trauma, which is about how trauma separates us from self, and some of these cutting edge trauma psychologists like Dr. Gabor Mate that I mentioned a lot in that book, or Dr. Peter Levine, talk about how trauma causes separation from self. And we can go into all the reasons why that happens. Since writing that, I discovered another therapist that Dr. Gabor Mate talks about sometimes, whose name is Dr. Richard Schwartz, and he talks about the internal family that's going on inside of people. And he founded a paradigm called internal family systems. And it's the same thing that the myths are showing. We have like the family of the gods. You've got it going on in here.
I actually did an episode earlier this year with a practitioner of internal family systems.
It makes so much, it unlocks so much clarity. And the ancient myths are talking about this. Now, when you talk about, tribes in Northern Europe or whatever, this is so ancient. And I do want to pull up some slides because I can show this is present in the earliest, the first dynasty artwork of dynastic Egypt. So this is pre-dynastic Egypt. This is present in the Vedas of India. So this is pre-Vedic India. The most ancient civilizations we know of are using this system, and I can demonstrate that. So this argues that it comes from something really early, probably before some kind of cataclysm. And the most ancient civilizations we know of, ancient China, ancient India, the Australian Aboriginal indigenous people of Australia have been on this continent, people, believe, for 30,000, 40,000 years. Obviously, it's in the southern hemisphere. And you mentioned the centaur, Mario, and we should pull up some visuals so people can see it. But the Sagittarius is a centaur, and I can show why Sagittarius is a centaur using the stars, but there's another constellation called the Centaur that I think you were talking about. And guess what? I never really saw it until I came to the southern hemisphere, but it's really bright in the southern hemisphere. Centaur is a very southern constellation. So is Argo Navis. And so if people, I'll finish after this little metaphor. If people want to think of what are they talking about? Northern hemisphere stars. Not everybody thinks about this stuff on a daily basis, but if you suspend the earth on a string in the middle of your room, whatever room you're sitting in right now, whether it's your living room, your bedroom, and paint stars on the ceiling, the walls, and the floor, and if you just grant with me that we're on a spherical earth, which we absolutely are, I don't think anyone can come to Australia, but we won't get into that whole thing. If you're on a spherical earth, no matter where you are, down is towards the ground, even if you're standing on the bottom of the ball. So if you're standing on the bottom of the ball, you can see the stars painted on the floor, but not the stars on the ceiling because the side of the ball will be in your way. And if you're standing on the top of the ball, you can see the stars on the ceiling, but not on the floor because the bulge of the ball will be in your way. And the further down the ball you go, the more farther down the walls you can see. But just about everywhere, in fact, everywhere on that ball, you can see the walls. Even in the North Pole, you can see the celestial equator. It's going to be right on your horizon, but you will see the zodiac signs because they're on the wall. They cross above the celestial equator, which is halfway up the wall and below it throughout the year. But no matter where you are, you can see those ecliptic constellations. That's the sun Earth dance goes right along basically the center of the wall. So in the middle of the tropics, you can see the wall, and you can almost see the North Pole will be at the ocean, and the South Pole will be at the ocean. And as you go farther up, you start to lose the floor a little bit. And the farther up you go, the more of the floor you lose. Anyway, that might be a helpful metaphor. But we can all see the zodiac. And we can also, in the Milky Way is basically a ring that's painted across the floor and up the walls and around perpendicular to that midline. And so we can see the Milky Way everywhere on Earth too. And so the system uses the zodiac and the Milky Way, and it could be from, I would argue, anywhere on Earth. I think of it as upside down when I'm down here in the southern hemisphere. Everything looks upside down to me because I don't feel like I'm upside down, but I'm looking at the posters on the wall and they all look upside down to me because I'm on the lower half of the ball now. And that's as good of a proof of that it's not a flat Earth. There's a few others that I've seen down here, like Venus is on the other side of the moon when you're on the southern half. Anyway, we won't get into flat Earth, but if I have a poster of Jimi Hendrix on my wall and I'm standing on the top of the ball and I always see Jimmy's head is up, when I get to the bottom of the ball, I'm still going to feel like I'm right side up, even though I'm really standing upside down on the ball. And I'll look out on the wall and I'll go, wow, Jimi Hendrix is upside down, just like Orion is upside down, quote unquote, down here. His sword is pointing upward from his belt. Anyway, I'm ready to show some slides, but maybe we could bounce. I kicked around a few comments, so I'll bounce it around the horn.
No, dude, I think we're good to jump into some slides, man.
Yeah,
I think people would get a lot out of seeing the stars themselves in this particular part of the sky and how the symbols that are laid up in Ophiuchus, which we can start to demonstrate as we're looking at them. Well, I've got good notes particularly from your work in front of me. So if there's anything that gets left out, I'll be able to chime in and make sure we add that on too.
Awesome. Well, jump in at any moment. Can you see the stars here on the screen?
Oh, it looks like your screen share is just your StreamYard window. So you might have to redo it, like maybe close it and restart it.
Okay. Close it and restart it, maybe.
But while you're figuring out the screen share, I thought it'd be interesting to consider just the name Ophiuchus. I'm a big language guy, name guy, and we brought up earlier Moses being an Ophiuchus character and how he raises the brazen serpent and how serpents on staffs or poles are a symbol of this sign that we see consistently and a symbol of saviors in general or salvation in general. The word for the brazen serpent is actually nakash, and that second syllable kash is basically the same word as the kush or kus in Ophiuchus. It's pretty much the same, which is particularly interesting when you consider how that word kush, and in philology, S sounds and SH sounds are totally interchangeable. Kush is said to be the one who begat Nimrod, and Kush is a son, I believe, of Ham. And Ham is one of the sons of Noah. So that makes Nimrod a great grandson of Noah. Nimrod is said to be a mighty hunter before the Lord. So right next to Ophiuchus is the mighty hunter before the Lord, Sagittarius. And if Kush or Ophiuchus begats Nimrod, that kind of makes sense because you could see Sagittarius coming off of Ophiuchus, like begetting it. And you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that's super interesting. I've got half my brain trying to figure out how to share on StreamYard, but so Ophiuchus also, I don't know about the connection with Kush. That's really interesting. I would say that the snake part of the Greek word that gave us Ophiuchus is the same word for ophite, and serpent in Greek is oph.
Right.
OPH. So, but yes, so the three sons of Noah, just so that all listeners know my position on that, are completely celestial in nature. I can show that Noah is definitely related to Aquarius. I can show you why the vineyard is next to Aquarius and Noah plants the first vineyard and then he gets drunk, and the whole Shem, Ham, and Japheth story, which has been taken literally and then used to divide people. And people actually say, oh, she's a Cushite or he's a Cushite, descended from Cush, as if anybody is literally descended from these characters in the Bible, has been used to divide people. But really,
it's like a racism thing, even, because totally you say if they're descendants of Ham, which means black, that means they're cursed because Ham was cursed. So and Ham that's one of the huge problems in the world, is all this stellar myth taken literally to justify all kinds of dumb stuff.
Yeah, but so I was listening with half my brain. At the other half, I was trying to get I went over to allow StreamYard to see notes. Can we see if maybe this will work? Can you see my notes now?
No, I think you need to go present and then share screen and then choose window and then choose the window that represents your represents your slides. That ought to do it.
Share screen. Okay. Oops. All right.
And back to that Milky Way thing. Nimrod was said to be the one who commissioned the building of the Tower of Babel. He was like the founder of Babylon. And I think maybe in this story, the Tower of Babel since it has, since it goes all the way up to heaven, so to speak, maybe that's the Milky Way in terms of where it shows up in the stars. It's right next, the Milky Way begins right next to Sagittarius there, which would be Nimrod.
I actually think it's Ophiuchus, but like I said.
Do you think Ophiuchus might be the Tower of Babel too? That makes sense too.
I could tell you why, but
well, they never really built it all the way to heaven, so it could be just Ophiuchus was all they got. They didn't make
Ophiuchus
it further than that.
The tower that connects us to heaven. It is the tower. Yeah. It's the pivot. It's like the clutch on your car. Even if you have an automatic transmission, there's still a clutch in there, and it's the connecting between the force of the engine and the wheels on the ground. Ophiuchus is the connecting clutch link between the force of the divine and us on the ground. You're absolutely right, Chance, that the zodiac is it's the earth. It's all our earthly gifts, which we need, but we also have this connection to heaven. So I'm still connection to the screen is my slides. What am I doing wrong here? Chance, just talk me through. Present, share screen,
then window.
It's not giving me
a new thing will pop up after you click share screen. Mm-hmm. And you want to choose the middle button, which says window. Do you see that?
Yeah, don't show these tips again. Share screen, pop out this video. I'm not getting the window anymore. Now it's just automatically don't know what it's doing. Are you able to see anything that I've got?
No, you don't have anything currently being shared.
All right. Share screen.
And is it asking you if you want to do a Chrome tab or a window or an entire screen?
It's not asking any of those things. Sorry to mess up our flow here. Present, share screen.
What happens after you click share screen?
Nothing anymore. No.
Maybe, David, why don't you try close your browser, come back into the room, and we'll see if that fixes it.
Okay. Drop it.
Cool. Yeah. So, Mario, I think that even, I think that this Kush part of Ophiuchus is very revealing because one of the figures associated with Ophiuchus is Krishna. And Krishna, the word means like swarthy or black. And Ham is the black word means black, and that's who begets Kush. So they're the black race, supposedly, in terms of the biblical historical narrative. I think that there's a lot there. Yeah. And that the word Bacchus comes, and we know Bacchus is a Jesus figure or a precursor to Jesus. Bacchus comes from the Phoenician Barkus, meaning son of Cush. So Bacchus is Nimrod. Bacchus, there's a lot of people who think that Bacchus, Noah, all the same guy, that all these like founder myths of different civilizations are really referring to the same idea as Noah and his three sons. So Bacchus being Barkus in Phoenician, son of Cush, means that Bacchus is basically unequivocally the same as Nimrod, and that Herodotus even says Jupiter carried Bacchus in his thigh. So there's coming from Sagittarius again. There's that Sagittarius connection. It's definitely, the astrotheology of it all is not debatable, but it's interesting to all the different ways that you can link Krishna, Jesus, Bacchus as the same figure once you have that lens.
Definitely. No, that resonates for sure. Are we looking better on David's side with screen sharing here?
I am getting the pop-up now. Introduce Ophiuchus by starting with the god Zeus, who is not Ophiuchus, is demonstrably not Ophiuchus, but he's fighting a character on this vase. Can you see an ancient vase on your screen?
Oh, yeah.
That is found in Munich. You can see the accession number right there. If you want to go dig up that vase in the museum, you can ask them to see it. This is definitely the god Zeus, and he's fighting one of his most powerful enemies, Typhon. And we know it's Zeus because of the thunderbolt right there, but also the ancient artist, or one of the ancient artist's friends who could write, has put the name Zeus right there. That first letter that looks like what we would think of as an I is a Z in ancient Greek. And I'm going to fill in the rest of Zeus because some of the paint has flecked off over the centuries. And you can see he's in this deep lunging posture, which Mario, I'm sure, has encountered in his symbolic research over and over. Where does it come from? This is an artist rendition, not my rendition. You can find this artist rendition on Wikipedia.
I wanted to point out also real quick, by the way, just so you know for the future, that spelling of Zeus is actually Etruscan, which is the precursors to the Italian people, who I think might actually be, if not the originators, one of the closest cultures to wherever this system originated from. Really interesting and kind of concealed stuff on the ancient Etruscans. They're like a Phoenician archetype, or connected with the Phoenicians. And it makes sense that they might have spread things around the world because that position in Italy gives them access to East and West, as sailors.
Very interesting.
But yeah, that's the Etruscan way of spelling Zeus.
I will, throw a counter argument that, like I said, if it's in the first dynasty Egypt and in the Vedas, it may not be that the Etruscans originated it. But, when you get to things like Göbekli Tepe, which is so ancient, it's more ancient to the Egyptians than the Egyptians are to us. In other words, if it's 9,000, 10,000 BC, that's 6,000 years before 3,000 BC. We're closer to 3,000 BC than they are to 9,000 or 10,000 BC. There was civilizations so ancient that they were more ancient to the Egyptians. The first Egyptian texts and images are using this system. So I think it came from something way more ancient. The first Vedas are using this system. So I think and it's different. So it's like it had already evolved by the time it resurfaced in Egypt and resurfaced in ancient India. It's very ancient. And I don't know that it spread around the world after the Egyptians. I think it may go back to some common worldwide culture that's been long forgotten because there was a cataclysm that separated.
I couldn't agree more with that. And when it comes to knowing how authentically ancient any texts are, especially the Vedas, where things had to be rewritten by the priests every 10 years because the climate would destroy the parchment. Who knows how old it really is or what the original versions were like. But I wanted to point out that letter that looks like an I is an Etruscan D or Z. So what you're seeing there is either Deus or Zeus. So you see how you get the name Deus as God and the name Zeus for the top god. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that DZ letter could be either way.
That's a really great, I'm glad you jumped in with that. And Dionysus is Dios or Zeus of Nisus, which there was a mountain or a legendary mountain, the Zeus of Nisus or Nyssa. Dionysus means the god of Nisus or Zeus of Nisus. So there was like this whole 1800s school of thought about chthonic deities versus Olympian deities, and Dionysus would be the chthonic Zeus, the underworld Zeus, or the earthly Zeus. And again, that mountain, I would argue, is associated with Ophiuchus, which we'll introduce Ophiuchus in just one second. But everyone look at Zeus's posture. I'm just going to show the constellation that plays Zeus is the constellation we call Hercules right there. Can you see it on the screen?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And I'll move it over and put it right above the outline of Zeus from the ancient artwork. And you can see the heel extended, raised, the deep knee bend in the constellation in the artwork, the powerful weapon raised overhead in the constellation in the artwork, the interesting outstretched arm, which why does Zeus have to reach out and touch the wing of his adversary? Because in the heavens, the constellation has this outstretched arm, which plays a role in lots of different myths around the world. So you can see that Zeus is associated with Hercules, and we find that around the world where the most powerful god in the pantheon will be associated with Hercules, the constellation, because of that very powerful weapon. Sometimes it's a club, envisioned as a club, sometimes as a sword, sometimes as a thunderbolt, sometimes as a mace, sometimes as a sling, like David and Goliath. But who could Hercules be fighting? Well, in this image, he's fighting Typhon, who has this human torso down to the waist and then serpent legs below the waist and wings. And in the sky, look back over at Hercules. Who could Hercules be fighting? Well, he could be fighting a lot of different constellations nearby, but if he's throwing down thunderbolts at Typhon, in this story, Typhon was actually thunderbolt proof. But you see how there's a constellation just below Hercules? In the sky, I've put like a thunderbolt. Can you guys see?
Yeah, we can see everything on your screen.
Right on. So that is the constellation Ophiuchus, right below Hercules, and that is my contender for who Zeus is fighting in this story. He's fighting Typhon. Typhon is associated with Ophiuchus. Typhon was thunderbolt proof. That's why he was so dangerous. The Olympian gods were trying to defeat Typhon, and even Zeus with his thunderbolt, which is the most powerful weapon on Olympus, the thunderbolts were bouncing off Typhon. So he finally had to do what? Do you guys know how he finally defeated Typhon?
Dropped a mountain on him.
Yes, he slammed a mountain down on his head. Can you see how Ophiuchus looks a little bit like a mountain? There's a triangle on top of it.
On the head, yeah, specifically.
Yeah, the constellation Ophiuchus, to introduce our listeners to Ophiuchus, has this oblong central body, oblong meaning like a tombstone, this rectangle, tall rectangles, like your gas pedal on your car is taller than it is wide, so it's oblong, with a triangle on top. Sometimes it plays a mountain, sometimes it plays the very pivot of heaven, sometimes it plays a monster with serpent legs. How could it play a monster with serpent legs? Well, so Ophiuchus doesn't just have that central body. On either side, there's a serpent that he's holding, and the name Ophiuchus, as we were talking about, the etymology does involve serpent holder, serpent bearer, holding a serpent, and you can see why in the sky it looks like he's holding a serpent. But the legs down below, it's like a very long body with very short legs. So sometimes an Ophiuchus figure will have a very big shield or a long tunic that reaches down, like, because the legs are kind of short, right? But the legs are even faint. So let's just remove the legs and pretend that we're envisioning it without those legs and turn the serpent halves into the two legs coming out of the bottom of the torso. Can you see what I'm arguing? Can you see how the two serpent halves of Ophiuchus match up with the two, I put 1 and 2 on the legs of Typhon? Leg 1 on the constellation, that's usually called the serpent's tail. Leg 2 is the serpent's head, and you can see there's a little hoop or triangle on top of it, a little ring. It's composed of basically 4 stars, 3 across the top, and then they come down to the serpent head there. Can you see what I'm arguing here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, for sure.
And it might seem like a stretch, but if we look throughout the world, if you see it over and over, eventually you realize that these creatures or mythical figures with a torso and 2 legs or 2 fish tails are associated with Ophiuchus. This is a mermaid from a book in the 1500s. Note she has 2 tails, just like Ophiuchus has 2 serpent halves. Look at her arm on the tail number 1 side. See how Ophiuchus's arm is higher on that side? It's like holding the top of the tail. And then look at her arm on this tail. Down here, she's holding down by basically the thigh of the fish leg. This is Ophiuchus figure. A mermaid with 2 tails is an Ophiuchus figure, just like we see on Starbucks coffee, where she has stars. In between Starbucks and coffee, we got stars. On top of her head, we have stars. On top of her head, we have a crown. Above Ophiuchus and right next to Hercules, we have a crown. That's the northern crown. It actually has 7 stars. So, Mario, you were talking about the 7 stars with an 8th in the center, and I noticed you had the Leontocephalus, the lion-headed god who's in chains, right? He's in chains, and he's holding up a little crown with 7 stars, and then there's an 8th in the center on one of your pictures. Why is he in chains? Well, Ophiuchus figures are sometimes bound in chains. Those 2 serpent halves can become chains, like the chains of Prometheus, or the bound, when Loki is bound, he's chained up like Prometheus too. And the Leontocephaline figure from Mithraic tradition, I'm convinced, is an Ophiuchus figure, and that's why he's got that 7-star crown above one of his upraised hands. So just absorb the picture of Ophiuchus for a second. We don't need to get too I don't need to get too long.
Oh yeah, Abraxas. So I just was waiting for you to bring up Abraxas. And the word for these guys with snakes for legs is anguiped. Anguiped.
I didn't know that word either. Dude,
the Abraxas is such an important weave. You would see this guy on coins and on amulets all throughout the Greco-Roman world, a lot of times with the word Iao, I-A-O, which is the iota alpha omega. I am the alpha and omega. This is the prototype Jesus before the Roman Catholic Church co-opted the symbolism or, reduced it down. Yep, there it is. There's the iota alpha omega at the bottom of that.
So you can see a rooster's head. Yeah, this is off of, like Chance was saying, this is off of a gem. These things were called gems or jewels, even though they're just kind of hammered out of metal there. But it was like a talisman or a token that certain like esoteric groups would carry. And you can see, again, it's a torso ending in 2 serpentine legs, or anguiped. Is that how you said it, Chance? That's really interesting. He's carrying a weapon in one hand and a shield in the other hand. And as you said, down at the bottom, there's the letters for alpha and omega. What I believe was going on were, these are all esoteric traditions that are connected to this ancient worldwide system. And they were swirling around in the Hellenistic era. Hellenistic meaning after Alexander the Great spread Hellenic or Greek culture around all the way to Egypt, all the way to India. Basically, he got to India before he died at a young age. But that mixture of Greek and all these other Mediterranean cultures mixing around created this real stew out of which a lot of stuff arose, including that's when the Gnostic texts were swirling around and the texts that were collected up into the Bible. So these are all, I would argue Ophiuchus figures within an ancient system. Jesus is an Ophiuchus figure. This Abraxas figure is an Ophiuchus figure. I'll show one more. This is off of actually Mithraic talisman. I believe that Mithraic is very key for history. I don't believe it was necessarily a good key. It was like a deep state that was overthrowing the Roman Empire, and they never quite figured out who was overthrowing them. And Mithraic wasn't a religion; it was a secret society. It was a very interesting. I've obviously written about it in Myth and Trauma, and also in The Undying Stars. But notice again, this is on the other side of a Mithraic talisman. On one side is Mithras killing the bull. On this side is Abraxas, and there's the IAW that you mentioned, Chance. So we can see
it's actually that's an omega, which is the Greek O.
Right. Yeah, that's a lowercase omega. Sorry, which is looks like a little W for us.
Right. Well, what you said, I want to just throw one more thing on the fire. This might not need to open into a topic, but someday, I don't know if you've ever done this, but someday you might consider like putting your astrotheology glasses on and looking at so-called history or historical figures, because I think, you brought up Alexander the Great spreading the culture from Greece to India to Egypt. There's a strong case to be made that Alexander the Great is a repeat of the Dionysus or Bacchus figure, because if you look into it, Dionysus is said to have done the exact same circuit and like gone in to conquer India and etc. And some of the traits about Alexander, including being supposedly born of a virgin, there's I think a there that somebody at one point may have written our history for us that has just been accepted since then. And we might, who knows, maybe there's even a cover up of whatever system came before. I have no idea.
I don't I don't dispute that possibility in the least. But there was a Hellenistic period, I believe, where all this stuff was mixing around and Greek ideas were being batted around in Egypt. And anyway, we can see that this is an Ophiuchus figure. I'll just pull up Ophiuchus. Can you see the outline of Ophiuchus there below on the right-hand side?
Yeah.
There's the central body. Now look at the weapon that Abraxas is holding. As anyone who played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, if you're Gen X, it's a flail. Look at the flail. He's got an upraised flail on one side and a small shield on the other side. There's what I would call a flail on the constellation Ophiuchus. Can you see it?
Sure. Yeah, it's right there.
And I don't know if the little circle of the serpent's head is a little tiny shield. We could argue maybe it's a different constellation like Libra. We'll show Libra in a little bit, but I would say there's a good case can be made that little circle is the little shield. You could maybe argue for the Northern Crown as well. I'm not dogmatic about it, but clearly this is an Ophiuchus figure with the two legs again, just like I was showing. So go ahead.
Yeah, I would love to add something real quick. Yeah. And I definitely want to get through as many images as possible because I'm finding all of this extremely fascinating. But this is a good example of kind of what I'm referring to when I think, and I get this really strong hunch and hit that Ophiuchus is very closely tied to Mercury, Hermes, and other sort of related figures. The serpent connection with Mercury and the caduceus, right? The fact that Mercury is considered a divine androgyne or having this dualistic sort of personality. That's being displayed in Ophiuchus too, with obviously one side being the head of the serpent, the other side being the tail. Also, Mercury Hermes is very much related to the phallus as well. And in a lot of Ophiuchus imagery that I saw, it's very clear that, that serpent could be the serpent between our legs, that there is some sort of correspondence there. When I see a snake going through the legs of a naked nude man and the head is just popping out, it seems like there is a genitalia sort of weave that you can kind of pull at with that, in my opinion. This figure here, Abraxas, it's interesting. So the phallus being the cock, and the phallus and the cock, the rooster, is associated with Hermes Mercury too. There's lots of examples of this animal being associated with this figure. And Manly P. Hall, at least, I think is really interesting. He says that Abraxas, the axis in Abraxas, relates to the world axis, which is the symbolic bridge between realms, right? Going from the North Pole to the northern sky. And this is kind of what I see as the stairway to heaven, right? And so it'd be in the middle of the heavens, which is like a great wheel. And it's not uncommon for Abraxas, at least I think this is more of a modern sort of thing, to depict Abraxas riding a chariot as well, being pulled by 4 horses. And so it just reminds me of that spinning of heaven and this kind of axle or this bridge that connects these different worlds sort of together. So when I see Abraxas, I see mercurial symbolism personally, and that flail being used potentially to whip those horses.
There's something else I got to throw on the fire here that we talked about, and maybe David was going in and out whenever I brought this up, but how Krishna is an Ophiuchus figure. Krishna means swarthy or black in the Hindi language. We're talking about black gods, the black sun, the underworld god of the underworld, right? This name Abraxas, Ab means father, Ra is son, and the XIS at the end is an X can be like a CH sound. So it's Kush again, basically. We're getting base Ab, father, Ra, son, Kush, black. So we're getting the black sun, the black father, son, or the underworld father, God. Like that's the name of this entity. And to weave on the Buddha Mercury train, put that in, you've proven pretty well that Buddha is symbolized by Ophiuchus, and Buddha and Mercury share the same name of a mother, Maya. And in the East, they actually called the planet that we call Mercury in the West, they call that planet Buddha. So there's for sure Hermes and Buddha are a syncretizable figure. And even if Hermes and Mercury in the Greek mythos gets all over the place and might show up as other characters in the zodiac, I think there's a strong case to be made for him being an Ophiuchus figure, especially when you fold in the Buddha aspect.
Yeah, well argued on both counts, Chance and Mario. I'll throw on even more onto that. So Krishna is definitely Ophiuchus, and I've got a slide that shows that. And he rides in a chariot in the Mahabharata, the great battle of Kurukshetra. This is ancient India, Sanskrit text, and it's the Bhagavad Gita is within Mahabharata, and that's Krishna is being the charioteer. So we'll get back to Krishna a little bit later, but also what you were saying about the phallic symbolism, Mario, is not just the serpent that's being held, but look at the central body of Ophiuchus. And so not only Krishna is technically an avatar of Vishnu, and Vishnu is also Ophiuchus. He dreams the world into existence with a lotus coming out of his navel. I didn't show it, so I'll just say it here. You can see the serpent's head as a lotus growing out of the navel of Ophiuchus, but also
some of the coins of Abraxas or versions like Abraxas, like the Indo-Greek king Telephos, Telephos. Look up coins of Telephos. It's kind of hard to make out, but there's actually lotus blossoming out of the ends of the serpents that are his legs. So the logos is the lotus. It's the savior. Vishnu is the savior of that Trinity, which corresponds to Christ of the Father, Son, Holy Ghost Trinity. So again, if Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu, it's definitely Jesus, and all of this is Ophiuchus.
Yeah, and so if people aren't necessarily following along, look at the Ophiuchus. On the one side, I've written flail. On the other side is the serpent's head. That is definitely a lotus in some myths. And you have like the tug of war where in ancient Egyptian symbology, where one side is pulling with lotus and one side is pulling with papyrus ropes, like the tug of war with the pivot in the center. Anyway, what I was going to say is there's also a lingam of Shiva, a Shiva lingam that is a phallic symbol that they pour offerings onto in India. Even to this day, they still do that. And it's representative of that central figure, central part of Ophiuchus. And this, I'll just circle back and then we can move on. But I'm providing a little bit more support, Mario, to say, yeah, I think you're right about a Hermes or Mercury connection, because in Greece, they have a tradition of a thing called a herm, which is like a Shiva lingam. It's basically a post with a Hermes head on top, but often it's a post with Hermes head on top and a phallus. That's all they show is the head. And it's very much a phallic symbol. So
going back to the Etruscan thing, they would call those points, sometimes they'd even call the type of godhead on a post a terminus, or some researchers, academics say that there's a god called Terminus, that, and other times sometimes it's Terminus, sometimes it's Hermes. But I think they're missing the boat, because in the Etruscan version of Hermes, his name is Termes. So the terminal point where, the boundary marker of the zodiac is Ophiuchus, because that's where you step up and off the zodiac. He's doing that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And David, you just kind of blew my mind right now. So what you're saying is that Ophiuchus is also encoding, right, the world mountain. And at least I believe in the Vedic world, it's Visuki, the world serpent, wrapped around the mountain that's being pulled, and that's kind of churning this mountain, right? That's what you're saying?
That's right.
That's amazing. Vishnu
is the pivot himself. Vishnu himself acts as the pivot. And I could have thrown up a picture where from Angkor Wat, where they show that very tug of war going on. And right above is Indra, who carries the thunderbolt, and he's in the exact position as the constellation Hercules. I could show it
Excellent.
from Angkor Wat, but I don't have it on this particular slideshow. I'd shown it in some other recent, in a presentation I gave in Southern California, a live one. But so that's what's going on. This is the pivot between earth and heaven. And so liminal figures like Hermes, it would make sense to, they boundary cross between the two realms. So let's just point out, I forgot to say one thing before I click the button. We had a rooster-headed deity who has serpent legs, which we could argue is a feathered serpent in some way, right? I mean, is that too much of a stretch? If it's got a cock head, as you said, a rooster head, and serpent legs, it's a feathered serpent. And here we have a Ophiuchus from ancient Mesopotamia. This is from a bas-relief of Nineveh, very, very ancient, probably 700 to 900 BC, I think is what archaeologists put it as. But he's got a bird's head, an eagle head, and this is definitely an Ophiuchus figure, which I'll show. But here's the oldest known depiction of a feathered serpent from the Americas. This is from the famous Stela 19 at La Venta. So it's thought to be Olmec, very ancient, and it's got the same feathered serpent motif with suspicious handbag, right? This is argued about in esoteric circles. What's the handbag? Where's the bag? Well, you have to understand that these are Ophiuchus figures, and then you'll know who it is. So this is an Ophiuchus figure, just like Abraxas, this Ophiuchus with the wings and the handbag, and he's holding a pine cone up. This is the constellation Libra. I just pointed out. So Ophiuchus is standing above Scorpio, and to the right of Scorpio is Libra. I just put the label for Libra. Can everyone see Libra? Can you guys see it? Hopefully viewers at home, right
Yes.
above the word Libra. It's basically a triangle with two scales or lines descended from it, and one scale is lower than the other scale. Can you see that? See how one side, the scale is a little bit longer and lower? And to the left is Scorpio. Can you see the menacing figure of a scorpion just below the feet of Ophiuchus?
Yep.
And so the lower part of Libra is on the Scorpio side. Now this I've put up to prove that this Ophiuchus is Ophiuchus. I'm going to have to take a detour through the Archangel Michael, who in Revelation 12 is described as fighting Satan, actually, that great serpent, the serpent with 10 heads. He's always depicted in artwork standing on, he cast down Satan. He's always depicted as standing on Satan or the devil. Can you see it down there in the picture? How he's standing on him?
Yeah, and I think people listening are probably familiar with that.
Yeah, and if you just go search Michael versus Devil on Wikipedia. This one, I like this one by Bartolomeo Vivarini from the 1400s. Here's another one that shows it more clearly. Yes, he's definitely standing on. Look at their spears in both cases. See how they're both using a spear going down into the dragon? I'll take that one away. Now here's the spear. Remember I said Ophiuchus figures carry staves, spears, rods. Hercules figures carry thunderbolts, maces, clubs. Sometimes Michael will have a sword, but notice what else Michael is holding. So you see how the spear is almost at the right angle for Ophiuchus, but look what else Michael's holding in his other hand. Can you see it?
It's
right
the
here.
scales.
It's the scales. And if you look closely, you'll see that the devil is pulling down on one of the scales. There's two little souls in the scales. One soul is getting pulled down by the devil and saying, ah, and the other's on the side that's going up has the hands folded in beatific expression. That one's going to heaven and the other one's getting pulled down by the...
It's really interesting symbolism because it kind of shows how what I think is true is that the evil in the world actually makes good people better. Mm-hmm. You know, the people that descend down into evil, all that ends up happening in the long run is that they train good people to be more good.
Well, what I think is going on is we're all the zodiac signs is all our different parts, and we've got these different parts, and we have to get them all in harmony rather than. But Interesting
Because
observation.
if he's pulling down one side, that causes the other side to go up.
True.
It's
And look at which side is down in the heavens. Libra side, the scales are pulled down on the Scorpio side. Scorpio is the devil that's being stood on by Michael. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Right.
Ophiuchus is standing on a serpent, and Ophiuchus is holding a scales. I don't think anyone would argue with me that Michael, the archangel, who's standing on the devil, casting him down, is Ophiuchus. So therefore, if the scales are Libra, now go back and look at the Apkallu. What's he holding in his lower hand? He's holding a handbag. That corresponds to the scales that Michael's holding. That corresponds to Libra. Can you see how the handbag looks like Libra?
Yeah. All you would have to do is just draw the outline with the
more rounded and
close the bottom, and the top triangle would be the handle.
That's right. And in his upper hand, he's holding the famous pine cone, the pineal gland, the enlightenment, the connection to the divine. Look at the upper hand of Ophiuchus in this case is the serpent's head. That's the pine cone above Libra. Can you see what I'm arguing here? And the wings are then the serpent tail on the left side of Ophiuchus. Mario?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Very interesting, man. I'm loving this presentation. So I want to say many thanks. You're connecting a lot of dots for me. And we're actually
I see what you did there, because it's connect the dot in the sky.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But no, this is very intriguing. And then, of course, you already said it, but, there's three main aspects to Scorpio that people have said over time, right? The scorpion, the serpent, and then the eagle or phoenix. So the serpentine symbolism, it's right there for sure.
Yeah, it's and the feathered serpent, that appears around the world, including in the Americas. See, this is why this is very ancient. Here's a gate called the Gate of the Sun, or the Puerta del Sol in Tiwanaku in Bolivia, modern day Bolivia. It's near Lake Titicaca. It's very famous. Can you see that it looks like a gate, and B, we've got a figure holding two staffs or keys or serpents or whatever he's holding? That is an Ophiuchus figure. And Ophiuchus is itself a door. And actually, if you zoom in, all the little figures all around are in a deep Hercules lunging posture. So this is an Ophiuchus gate. And Jesus says, I am the gate. I think Chance already alluded to that, or maybe Mario, or you alluded to that. This is Ophiuchus again. And so what's going on? This is my most recent book, Invoking the Ancient Gods in You, where I really lay out my argument about it's connected to IFS, and it's connected to, we have this higher self that's been excluded. And here's why. Oh, here's the contents. Chance notes, Myth and Trauma has a whole chapter on Ophiuchus. Fair, it does. But I wasn't done yet, because the contents of Invoking the Ancient Gods in You has chapter 5, What Would Ophiuchus Do? So it's really central to this whole system. Ophiuchus is really central to the whole system. And I'll kind of show you what I think is going on. And if you don't mind, I'll quickly zip over to Stellarium. How are we doing on time? Do we need to kind of cut it off?
No, I think we're good. I'll figure out how it gets edited later, but if you guys can go for another maybe 42 minutes, that'd be perfect.
Okay, let me show some Stellarium to everybody. Can you see it on the screen?
Yeah.
Right on. So here's Stellarium. I had it all prepped, but I should have gotten rid of these labels because those are annoying. So let's get rid of those. And here we are in the sky. What I'm trying to show here is the sun moving through the zodiac. So there's our Ophiuchus, but let's go back to noon. And I am in the northern hemisphere, so I'm looking to the south to see the zodiac. We won't get into too much celestial mechanics here, but here's Ophiuchus, if you can see, just to the right. But I'm putting the sun basically right above south. And I'm just going to keep it there as I move one day at a time throughout the year. Now, the planets are going to zoom in and out around the sun. You're going to see planets. I don't know why they're looking so big today on Stellarium. I'll have to figure that out. But the one bright object that's not zipping around. It's staying pretty much above the letter S in the center of your screen. That's the sun. It's going through Taurus right now. Can you guys see the sun? I wish I could put my finger on it and everybody see, but it's right in the middle. It's, I don't know why those planets are so big.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So this is the sun right here in the right. This is the constellation Cancer, the crab. I think this must be Jupiter or something. Let me put the labels on so everyone can just see for sure what's going on. Oh, Venus. It's got Venus bigger than the sun for some reason. I can't figure out what's going on with my stellarium, but that's the sun. If you look closely, you can see it says sun. So what we're watching is the sun, and I've got to leave the other planets because if I make the other planets disappear, the sun will also disappear off of the screen. So let's just get rid of those labels and keep your eye on the sun, which is that one, and watch it go through real quick. As we go through, what's happening is throughout the year, each day at noon, the sun is slowly moving through a different background of stars, a different constellation. And the background stars that the sun moves through are the zodiac signs. It's moving along the ecliptic. Boom. There we are in December 13th. It's crossing. You see what it's crossing right here?
Yeah.
The leg of Ophiuchus. So the ecliptic path, the path of the sun, the path along which eclipses happen, does cross Ophiuchus. So Ophiuchus has a claim to being in the zodiac, but Ophiuchus is left out. So
one foot in, 1 foot out. Classic,
right.
Classic liminal space.
Liminal figure, a threshold figure. Oops, I moved the time. Let's get back to noon. That's 12 o'clock. And apologies for daylight savings time. It sucks. We should get rid of it. But look at the sun. You see, as we move through the year, now it's in Sagittarius. Now it's in Capricorn. It's moving higher above the horizon during the summer months of the northern hemisphere. This would be opposite for the southern hemisphere. We're in the northern right now, but you can see it moving through the background stars. This is really all I wanted to show, is that it's going through all the zodiac background constellations as well as Ophiuchus. So now it's in Gemini. Now it's in Cancer. Now it's coming up on Leo. We'll just get it up to Ophiuchus one more time so everyone can hopefully see what I'm talking about. It's going through Leo. It's going through Virgo. It's coming up to Libra that we saw in the diagram. There's Libra right there. It's coming up to the multiple heads of Scorpio. So Scorpio often plays a serpent with multiple heads. Think of the Hydra that Hercules has to fight. Now it's going through Ophiuchus again. So, and it is kind of fun to sometimes remove the horizon. You can see all the way down as if the earth was a crystal ball and didn't get in the way. You could see all the way down to the southern celestial pole down there.
It's kind of interesting that point of intersection hits so perfectly on the 13th day of the 12th month. 12 and 13. That question, is it 12? Is it 13?
Fascinating. Esoteric calendar. Good observation.
Right. And then I think it's interesting too that it hits the knee like that. And, the beginning of Capricorn, which is not too far away from that, it corresponds with the knee. Capricorn corresponds with the knees. So that's kind of curious too.
It is very interesting. And actually, if you look closely at Ophiuchus, 1 foot is in the Milky Way and 1 foot is not. Let me show it here. Can you see it on the screen? 1 foot is on the land, 1 foot is in the sea. And you can see that in Revelation chapter 10, where one of the angels is described as having 1 foot on the land, 1 foot in the sea. Can you see it on the picture?
Totally.
And also, let me riff one more time on Mario's observation of Ophiuchus as Hermes. Like I said, Hermes sometimes seems to be Aquarius, but I do see a connection between Aquarius and Ophiuchus sometimes. Ophiuchus, if you've read Star Myths Volume 4, and I know you have, Chance, which is about Norse myths, there's a Norse god who is the herald of the gods, just like Mercury or Hermes is the herald or messenger of the gods. who's the Norse god who's the herald of the gods?
Heimdall.
That would be Heimdall. Now, Heimdall carries a huge trumpet or horn, the Yaller horn, and it wraps around his body. Can you see how the serpent of Ophiuchus could look like the Yaller horn of Heimdall?
And you remember me bringing up Ham or Ham, son of Noah, which means black. And what's the first syllable of Heimdall? Ham.
Very interesting. Let's just for argument's sake, if you can see.
In the funny thing is, in the Marvel movies that have Thor in them, they made Heimdall a black guy, and all the rest of the Asgardians are white.
That is true. Heimdall. There's a really cool old picture of Heimdall. I'm not going to find it in time, obviously, on this Wikipedia, where it shows his horn really wrapped around his body in a very Ophiuchian way. The artist. We don't.
Doesn't he also like guard or manage the Rainbow Bridge?
Rainbow Bridge. He's right next to the Milky Way. He's the liminal figure between Asgard and Midgard, which is Earth. I'm not finding the really nice one where it's wrapped around him, but it's wrapped. Trust me, it's wrapped around him just like in the sky. And Heimdall is the child of either 8 or 9 mothers. I forget which. And so I'll give you one more bit of esoteric celestial. There's an old song that says Father Abraham had 7 sons. 7 sons had Father Abraham. Sometimes descended from a constellation will be right below it. So Ophiuchus figures will often be descended from Hercules figures. Okay. But sometimes they'll arise from. So Heimdall has 8 or 9 mothers. Remember how I said Scorpio has 8 or 9 heads, or sometimes 10 heads? The dragon in Revelation has, I think
7.
7 heads and 10 crowns, or 7 heads and 10 horns. But anyway, the dragon in Revelation is definitely Scorpio. Heimdall has 8 or 9 mothers. That's because he's rising up out of Scorpio. Okay. Let me just zip through a few more. Now that we've gone to Stellarium.
I think it actually is a good point for me to bring up, because you just had that image of the gate up again, and this is the god of gates. There's some philology that I think you'll find fascinating here, that all these figures, they hold a staff or a pole, right? Well, what's that phonetic is of the pole, P to L, pole? The word gate or door in Greek is pul, like P-U-L-E, pula. In Hindi, it's pola. What do they call, what's the epithet, the first word that comes to mind before Minerva or Athena?
Pallas.
Pallas. So the word Pallas is said to refer to wisdom. And of course, the Ophiuchus figures refer to wisdom. But when we say Pallas Athena or Pallas Minerva, we're also saying the gate of Minerva, the gate of Athena. And you make a great case for Athena being Ophiuchus. She's got the Aegis. The Aegis has the fringe of serpents around the bottom of it, which is the snake legs. And she's holding a spear or a pole. The crested helm is another symbol. There's a lot there.
We'll show Athena or Minerva in a moment. So what I think is going on, let me just explain why wisdom gods or goddesses are associated with Ophiuchus. I believe what is happening is it's describing what's going on in our inner landscape. And does that also correspond to a spirit landscape where there are actual, pleroma or gods or invisible realm? I'm not denying it. I think it's more likely than not, yes, but it's definitely going on inside of us. The internal family systems that I mentioned talks about we have all these different parts, and because of childhood trauma or trauma in other circumstances, we can become disconnected from ourselves. We actually will become disconnected from ourselves as a survival mechanism. Modern cutting-edge psychologists who deal with trauma, not all of them, that these pioneers of trauma like Gabor Mate or Richard Schwartz or Peter Levine, or there's a group, they're by no means the entire psychology field is talking this way. This is a pioneering group who explain why we disconnect from self as a survival mechanism, especially as an infant or a young child who depends on your parents. You will suppress yourself if the other parts of you believe that they need to survive. And that's what's being depicted over and over in these myths of the higher self figure, such as Jesus, being suppressed or sent down to the underworld or buried. This is from Genesis 37. This is the story of the brothers, the 12 brothers, killing Joseph, or they don't actually kill him. They put him down in a hole and then they sell him into slavery in Egypt. But eventually he comes back because higher self can be suppressed, can be, no matter what happens to it, it can come back. Jesus is, speared in the side and crown of thorns, comes back. He's a higher self figure, an Ophiuchus figure. Inanna, the goddess of Sumer, she goes down to the underworld. She's hung up on a hook for 3 days. Another Ophiuchus figure. That flail could also be a hook. The serpent's tail could be a hook. She comes back because what they're showing is that no matter what your higher self has gone through, you actually still have access to it. It's indestructible. It's divine. It's connected to the divine. So Joseph, in this painting by Tissot, he was a very famous 1800s painter. He's showing Joseph telling his dreams. Oh, he's connected to dreams. He's able to interpret dreams. He's able to hear the voice of the divine and interpret it properly. That's what our higher self is able to do. But the brothers are like, let's kill him. I'm sick of this guy. We do it without even knowing that it happened. And then we forget that it happened because it's a defense mechanism. You can see the brothers' faces. They're like, I'm about sick of this kid. Mm-hmm. But look at the painting. And I'm going to show how this is. Oops. I messed up. Let me, can you see it? Can you see that this is Ophiuchus on a mound?
Yeah.
All right. There's Tissot.
I mean, the brothers even kind of resemble either the 9 heads of Scorpio or the just maybe even a 9 sign zodiac, because
how many children of Israel are there? There's 12. Tissot has only put 10 in his painting, but you've got kind of like some twins over on the left. But look at where Joseph is. He's up on a mound. Now, can you see, I put Ophiuchus on the right of your screen. Can anyone see the Milky Way? Oh, sure. I'll put in all that. We've now become familiar. The brothers, the children of Israel, are the zodiac. They're in Genesis 49. I think I even put it on here. It becomes very clear in the blessing. They're all given different traits of the zodiac. Can you see smoke?
Can I throw one more thing on your pile here? Is Eusebius, the church father of ecclesiastical history. Mm-hmm. He has something in his writings where he claims that the Phoenicians called Kronos or Saturn Israel. So when we say, obviously the Hebrew language is connected to the Phoenician language. When we say the children of Israel, it's esoterically encoding the children of Kronos, children of time, which is what the ecliptic, the zodiac is. I just wanted to throw that out there that, this character Israel that begets Joseph and his brothers, that's time, that's Kronos, that's Saturn as the father of the gods.
Yes, and Kronos carries a sickle. Look on the left side of Ophiuchus.
That's their father, right?
Yeah, it's a very interesting. I've got a whole chapter called the Golden Age because Kronos, Saturnian figures rule over golden ages. Ophiuchus is a Saturnian figure that gets suppressed and sent down. The Golden Age is when you weren't disconnected from yourself. Now you are, and you want to get back to being connected with yourself. But can you see how the painting, just to move it along, he's put Joseph next to some smoke rising from the brothers cooking their lunch there?
Yeah.
Perfect illustration of the Milky Way.
It's the perfect Milky Way. Now, remember how we said I showed you Stellarium to show that the sun goes through the foot. The foot of Ophiuchus dips down into the realm of the zodiac. Can you see? There's the ecliptic line. I've drawn it through the zodiac constellations and the foot of Ophiuchus. Look at in Genesis 49. That's where we find out that the children of Israel are associated with the different zodiac signs. People argue over which one's which, but you can clearly see that Ophiuchus has a foot down amongst the brothers. Look in the painting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, this is a beautiful painting, man. I love everything you're pointing out. And people underestimate one-legged or one-footed symbolism. It says so much when you're decoding an old painting or a statue or a tarot card or something like that. There's a lot that can be conveyed by highlighting one foot. And I'm just reminded of some tarot cards with the magician, and he's making an as above, so below kind of gesture with his body, right? He's doing the same thing. He's pointing upward with his hand, pointing downward with his foot. You're going to see Mercury, Hermes doing this too quite a bit. A lot of times he's standing on one foot and he's kind of has one finger kind of up in the air. The way I always interpret this is kind of like what you said. It's like being a bridge between worlds, right? And so you are connecting the above and the below. And the way I tend to look at it too is I also separate what's above and below. So I kind of see what's called world axis symbolism kind of baked in here. But I love the contrast too between him being younger, his hair is exposed, everyone else has caps on, you know, even he's dressed a little differently than everyone else. And just like what you're saying, it does seem as though it's being implied that he's on a central mound or a central mountain or something that's kind of an ascension point, if you will, right?
Really great analysis. These paintings, and it goes back to paintings, you know, from the 1300s, the 1400s, but also ancient artwork that's on the sides of temples in Egypt or India. The celestial symbolism is just astonishing once you see it. And yes, that as above, so below, or the connecting the two realms, it's really clear when you spell it out and look at this picture. And often that upraised hand will have like a thumb and two fingers. And if you look at the serpent head, there's three little stars that create the serpent head. If we were to zoom in on the stars of the serpent head of Ophiuchus, they're not evenly spaced. It's like the thumb is on the left or closest to the body, and then there's like two fingers. And you'll see Jesus do that same kind of upraised symbolism. So what I believe is being depicted, they're not just doing this for fun. They're saying, this happened to you. You suppressed your higher self, your connection to the divine, your connection to the heavens. I love what you pointed out, Mario. They've all got caps on their heads that cover up their top lotus chakra or the infinite chakra. I guess we could argue maybe that one guy doesn't on the left of the smoke, but definitely it's like he's connected to the heavens, they're connected to the earth. This artist is depicting it, but he's also incorporating all this celestial imagery. You could just do this over and over and yet I've been talking about this. I've tried to send it to university art departments. They just ignore it. The self has all these, and these are words that Richard Schwartz talks about, the characteristics of self: calm, confidence, compassion, connectedness, curiosity. Those are the traits that self exhibits innately in everybody. But when these different parts take over for defensive reasons, we act in ways that are unwelcome. They're doing it for defensive reasons because they're trying to hide trauma. And that's what I believe these myths are showing. And they're saying the solution is to get back in touch with that buried self. You don't even know you have it because the parts that have buried the self have done such a effective cover up. They're like, what self buried under the subconscious memories? I don't see any self around here, officer. We didn't do away with the self. But myths are pointing us to getting reconnected with self, as that is how you start to exhibit all those characteristics. It's not by trying to imitate Jesus. That's why I have the chapter called What Would Ophiuchus Do? There's Ophiuchus above the zodiac. And that's why wisdom figures, the divine wisdom comes from, you've already got it. If you can get back in touch with self, the more we can get those parts to acknowledge self and then allow self to lead them again. They lost trust in self and buried it, just like the brothers. The more we have access to actual divine inspiration, divine wisdom. Here's Athena. Obviously, she has a spear. She has a helmet, a little shield. She is definitely an Ophiuchus figure, as Chance was giving some examples. She springs out of the head of Zeus. We've already seen that Zeus is the constellation Hercules, and boom, out comes Athena, full grown. She's
David. To add to what you were saying though about those defensive aspects that come in that cut us off from higher self, I think it's interesting now that we're looking at Athena again, that epithet Pallas, meaning what wisdom, but also sharing roots with words in all kinds of languages referring to gates. So like polis, that's the city. Yeah. And why is it a polis? It's because what defines it as a city is it's got a gate, it's got walls, it's guarded. And I think maybe what we're being shown here through language, because one of the things about the language is such a vast mystical subject to study that even without knowing it, we encode dual meanings within everything we say, where higher self is actually speaking to us through us. And we might not even realize it if we're only stuck in one like left brain definition style of understanding. But if you can get in and dig through all the alternate possible meanings and the phonetics that you're saying, you might actually realize, oh, I'm saying something way deeper and wiser. And I think maybe what's being said here is that fear makes you believe that violence, closed offness, withdrawing, splintering, schisming, that these things are protective measures. But wisdom itself is all the protection you need once you're truly in tune with higher self. It's a trust thing where you can know that no matter what happens, even no matter how gnarly it is, there's a trustworthy person there, which is myself, which means you don't have to have all these sort of defensive reactionary qualities, because you'll just know that you'll do the right thing in the moment, whatever is required. And so wisdom is like your defense. Wisdom is your pole, your spear. It's your weapon and it's your shield. And all
it's your
of that.
Open gate. I love, it's really beautiful how you're pulling out the esoteric meaning of the gate. It's like you're open things divine wisdom can express without you even knowing it. As you're pointing out in these words, the place of Athena in Athens is called the Acropolis, right? If I'm not mistaken, the Parthenon dedicated to Athena is on the Acropolis, which has that same root that you keep bringing us back to. And it's a portal. It's an opening for divine wisdom. I mean, I can cite instances in my life where things have been happening before I even knew that I couldn't have been making them happen. It's like the divine, these things can happen without, if, like you're saying, the openness is an important aspect of this divine connection, to let it come through.
Right.
Acro means high. So the Acropolis is like the high city, which is, that's what Athena is. She's the one that's higher up above the rest.
On the high gate. She's a high gate. Look at Ophiuchus. And so wisdom figures are associated with Ophiuchus, as is Solomon. He's in between two pillars. This is by Raphael, actually, the famous Judgment of Solomon.
Oh yeah, the two pillars thing, by the way, pillar, it's the same phonetic as palace and pole. But we maybe should make sure that is understood, why that symbolism, or like the two clefts of like the cleft of rock symbol, like how that fits into the Ophiuchus asterism.
Yeah, well, I don't have Ophiuchus on the picture with Solomon, but suffice it to say, there is no doubt in my mind that Solomon is Ophiuchus, and he's the son of David, who's associated with Hercules and has a harp right next to him, the lyre of Lyra the lyre. I will have a map of Ophiuchus. So hold the thought of Solomon's two pillars. Here is, we've gotten to Krishna. I'll just move it along because we're almost done with the slides, and then we can bat around some thoughts and get more of Mario's take too on some of this. Krishna is obviously standing. This is a very famous story about Krishna defeating a different Nag or Naga called the Kaliya Nag. This is Krishna. He's standing on the Kaliya Nag, just as we saw Michael standing on the 7-headed or 10-horned dragon before. It's the same stars in heaven, the same constellations have generated a different story in ancient India. Is Krishna defeating the Kaliya Nag. It's usually pronounced without the A on the end. This one is not as high resolution, and also the snake doesn't have multiple heads. Usually he does have 5 or 7 heads in the depictions, but the reason I show this one is I like the flute depiction. Krishna is almost always depicted with this flute off to one side. Can you see how he's Ophiuchus? First of all, he's standing on a multi-headed serpent. That's Scorpio. Can everyone see it?
And the Nagas is the same word as Nakash or Nahash, the Hebrew word for serpent. C sound and G sound interchangeable.
Yeah, I'll grant you that. I didn't ever think of that. See how the flute is off to one side on Krishna, standing on the head of Scorpio?
Yeah.
And here's a more recent statue. This one's in, I think, Singapore, but that's very typical of the way Krishna holds the flute off to that side. You see how it is? I would even argue that the umbrella over his head is a Ophiuchus. When you see those chariots, you mentioned how Abraxas is sometimes in a chariot. Krishna's chariot will almost always have an umbrella at the top of it. Ophiuchus itself can be a chariot. And I talk about that somewhere in some of my books. But there is no doubt that this is a worldwide system. It's not just in Western esoterica, although that, maybe what we're most familiar with, or if you study Tarot, then you see these symbols in Tarot, but it is worldwide. We saw it in the Americas with the Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku, and I could show it to you in Maya paintings and artwork from Maya cups and vessels. And we saw that Olmec stela from La Venta in modern day Guatemala. It's just really undeniable that these figures, these divine self figures, are associated with Ophiuchus. And I would argue it's because of that dynamic that Ophiuchus is the connection between the zodiac and the divine realm along the Milky Way. And Jesus is, as we've mentioned, an Ophiuchus figure. Can anyone spot any scorpions in this picture?
Just a couple.
This is from the 1400s, Giovanni Boccati. Often, Jesus being crucified in between two thieves. Can you see how distorted the thieves look? This is not even the most distorted, but the crucified between two thieves is Ophiuchus again, and standing on a scorpion or above a scorpion. The artist here has put scorpions down below the feet of the crucified trio there. This one is the one I really like to show. I don't know what that red line's doing off to the right, but obviously I'm going to do some animation. That's what. This is from an artist named Martin van Heemskerk, who's obviously Dutch, also, 1400s, 1500s. Look at how distorted and twisted the felons on either side are. They're really on some twisty crosses, whereas Jesus is on the standard Ophiuchus cross. Well, I gave it away because that red line isn't supposed to come in quite yet, but can you see how that central shape of Ophiuchus can give rise to the standard cross, and then the two thieves on either side are on twisty crosses on the either side of the serpent halves of Ophiuchus?
Yeah, I could totally see that.
And so the 12 disciples, it's the same pattern as Joseph being sent down or betrayed by his 12 brothers or the children of Israel.
And if it wasn't clear that this crucifixion scene fits astrotheology to Jesus dying on the cross and being dead for 3 days, right after this point in the sky clock, whereabouts we get the winter solstice.
That's right, the turning point. And also, I want to point out that we don't have obvious scorpions all over the place, but there is a figure. If you look straight down from the cross, there's the skull, the place of the skull. But you can see a guy kind of on his stomach. He's naked, and he's actually in the shape of Scorpio, I've argued. That guy is in a Scorpio position down there. But artists do this all the time throughout the centuries. What I'm saying is, I believe that this system is depicting this internal drama. You have a higher self figure that corresponds to the aspects of Jesus, able to heal trauma, able to deal with any situation. You have a higher self that has been buried. That's what the myths are trying to show us. And they show it to us in this esoteric way because we've suppressed the idea so firmly that it's like, I always go back to my Mr. Miyagi metaphor. It's like Mr. Miyagi has to get around Daniel's doubts by using wax on, wax off to almost do an end around, because Daniel is so full of doubts and so doubtful of himself, he wouldn't even listen if Mr. Miyagi said, "This will stop a kick." Daniel-san would be like, "Are you sure?" But instead, Daniel-san teaches him in an esoteric way to get around all those doubting defense mechanisms. We've suppressed our own higher self, all these different parts. They're not bad. They have something to give us, but they need to get back in harmony. It's like it's like a pro basketball team has locked their coach in the locker room, and they're squabbling on the floor as to who should take the final shot or who needs to sit out for 5 minutes instead of trusting the coach. I hope that is fairly clear. I kind of zipped through it a little bit in the interest of trying to get through all the slides, but that is what I believe is going on and why Ophiuchus is so important.
Excellent, man. I love it. As you were talking about a lot of this stuff, Chiron came to mind a number of times, the story of Chiron, the wounded healer, and I know that it's said, if I'm not mistaken, that Chiron, or at least one version of the myth, is that he studied under Asclepius, which obviously has a correlation with Ophiuchus, and Chiron also being attributed to being one of the inspirations for Sagittarius. Obviously, there's variations on the theme about, who actually inspired, what constellations, and there's different storylines with all of that. But just the idea of the wounded healer transmuting, these core wounds, invisible wounds, and then how a lot of shamans and healers and things like that, they generally have gone through some sort of major trial, in their life that they've had to transmute. So the fact that you're integrating trauma and everything else into your work, I can really appreciate that. And I think it makes a lot of sense, and I'm on board with it. I just gave a class in person called Symbolism Itself, and this is kind of what I built up to as well. Awesome.
Yeah. Look at all these myths have so much trauma in them. I mean, the Joseph story, the brothers hate Joseph for a variety of reasons, but one is the father says, "Oh, Joseph is my favorite, and I'm going to give Joseph a special coat." And the brothers are like, it's in the Adam and Eve story. It's in all the Greek myths. There's so much horrific things going on. You say, what is the point of all this? It's actually showing what's going on when we go through these different experiences that we have in this life. And I believe you can have a culture that is less traumatic and a culture that is more traumatic. And I believe we're probably on the path to making more and more trauma the way that society has been going, where children are not given the kinds of support and
comfort as children that they should be getting, because the parents are not because the parents are bad, but because they're working 3 jobs, or they're, stressed out themselves, or they're carrying all kinds of baggage from their upbringing.
The self is the aspect of being that is doing the noticing. And then there's the self that is the part that notices that there's something that's noticing. So it's kind of like it just kind of goes on in an infinite recursion, but you can, at the very least, understand that a whole person who's experiencing themselves in a state of wholeness, they're also in a state of pure awareness. So the less filtered their awareness of reality is, the closer to truth they are. And the closer to truth you are, the closer to self you are, right? And one of the things that goes on in this culture is that awareness and attention is constantly being attacked. And that with our current type of technology and all the things on offer, what a traumatized person will do is try to escape from themselves, try to escape from the moment, try to escape from the truth, try to escape from reality. And so there's more and more time of the day that people spend, a larger and larger percentage of their time, where they're checked out, hypnotized, trance-like state, not really fully present, or their attention is on something that is unreal, that has no basis in reality, or they're not correlating it to what is real. They're in the Baudrillard sense, the hyper reality. And then the more the hyper reality becomes their main, then the more egregiously wrong real reality feels, and the more they want to escape further into hyper reality experiences. So you're right about, we're in a culture that we have all the tools, more than ever. The tools and techniques are available to actually come to grips with trauma, which I think the ultimate, as somebody that helps people through this in my practice, outside of being a podcast host, what I've come to understand is that the way we heal trauma is not just knowing that it happened or how it made us feel or who done it or any of that, but coming to a full understanding of how the trauma affected our behavior and gave us an idea of our personality that is actually something we have free will over. It's not just how we are or just how life is, just how the world is. Somebody in one of my Telegram chats said an awesome thing, that our magic is in our worldview. And I think that's a big part of healing trauma too, and why this work that you do is so helpful. And the Myth and Trauma book is so great. And all the syncretism work is great, because it shows that humanity is actually has deeper and more powerful roots than what you might have believed. And that's a worldview healing thing. It's a division healing thing, to see like, oh, there's no need to try to say one religion's better than another. They're actually all saying the same thing. They're all pointing to reality, which is the sky. That's the reality we all share. It's the collective unconscious, because it's the thing that no matter where you are, everybody can see the whole sky, right? So that's kind of my take on it. It's about getting to understand how it affected your behavior. And that's the gap between reacting and stimulus.
It's a beautiful summary. And I think it's probably a great place to leave it. And when you were talking at the beginning about kind of the traumatic attempt to escape or go into, get some cotton candy reality or hyper reality or, comfort. The irony is self connects us to this, connects us to nature, connects us to other people, and connects us to the divine realm in ways that it's like all the things that you're looking for as substitutes, you can actually,
the real thing tastes way better.
The real thing, you have access to the real thing. And so it's like, this is the most exciting quest in each of our lives. And the most important is for us to recover. And that's what we're all searching for, recover self and not get rid of all the other 12 either. You notice Jesus doesn't throw out Thomas when Thomas is doubting. He doesn't say, "Oh, Thomas, now I will poof, disintegrate you. No, he gets Thomas into a right relationship. All of our different, it's not like we only just now stay in self, but now all the different gifts that we have from those different zodiac ingredients that we have can play a more positive role instead of the kind of like disruptive, angry, delinquent role that they're playing in order to try and cover something over. And now we get the whole team. Anyway, I think that was a beautiful summary, Chance. And also Mario, I love some of the angles that we're bringing out that I haven't seen, that you with your symbology and Chance with the language and history and palace. And I think we've just hit on some beautiful angles on this mystery.
Yeah, I agree. No, this conversation was a gift, man. With everything that I'm interested in right now, this came at me at the right time, taking some pretty big things away from it. And maybe we'll do it again sometime. This is great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Chance. Thank you, Mario.
Yeah. So you guys are good. Got no other closing thoughts or want to promote anything that you want people to know about?
I just pulled out a tarot card I was going to share real quick. This is Mercurio. So this is the Montaigne deck. And you can see that Mercury has his flute there, right? Because you just brought up flute symbolism. And then you can see that, he has kind of a variation on the caduceus with twin dragons. And then down below,
the flute is on the correct side, like Krishna too.
Ah, yes. Good point. And then you can see that there's that rooster down below, right? So Mercurio.
That head he's standing on is interesting too. Yeah. It makes me think of how, so after the multi-head and the serpent element is very Scorpio, right? With Medusa. I'm not sure if you've correlated Medusa with Scorpio, David, but it's possibly there. I know there's a Medusa and Perseus elsewhere too in the stellar tableaus of the sky, but the Ophiuchus, right? The Greek, last weave, I swear. The word in Greek for kus or kush was actually krusor, which is basically the same word because the upsilon can be a Y or a U. It's the same spelling and the same word as Chrysor, which is the being that jumps out of the head of, or the severed head of Medusa. And
along with Pegasus.
Which is right. There's something lacking with Chrysor in terms of mythology. There's not a lot said other than that moment of him being born, unless you go with the one weak link that connects him to Bellerophon or identifies him as Bellerophon, in which case it's like a proto Hercules figure. And that's a whole nother story. But he's like potentially a savior archetype or a mercurial traveling character, messenger character. So Chrysor jumping out of Medusa's head is what I see when I see that head at the feet of Mercury, for sure, because Chrysor is Kush.
So interesting. Yeah, there is a lot of examination of the Medusa myth in Myth and Trauma, as you can imagine from the illustration on the cover, but also it's such an important myth, invoking the ancient gods in you. There's even more. So check that out.
Ask for it for Christmas. I'm going to.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thanks for everyone who's listening. Thanks, Chance and Mario, for making this magical time happen and making the magic happen. And I hope that the conversation has been a blessing to everybody out there listening, just like it has been to me.
Yeah, buddy. Thank you. It's been a blessing on my end. I've been wanting to do this. And of course, it's just the tip of the iceberg with Ophiuchus, but I hope people will now see some of the keys to the symbolism that will allow them to identify it when it comes up, when they come across it in whatever mythology or religion they might be checking out. And check out Mario at symbolicstudies.com. He's on TikTok. He's on YouTube. He's on Instagram. Probably more. You can do a lot with him, including one-on-one tarot reading sessions. And David is at starmythworld.com, and all his books are there. And he's got a YouTube channel. And other than that, we'll have to do it again, guys. We'll just pick another subject and deep dive it someday. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks again.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
All right, guys, take care.